So imagine you start a new job at like a massive Fortune 500 company.
Okay. Yeah.
And on day one, they sit you down and hand you the standard corporate HR manual.
Right. The giant heavy binder of rules.
Exactly. So you're flipping through it, right?
Yeah.
You see the chapter on how to file a grievance. You see the standard PTO policies, all totally normal stuff.
Yeah. Just standard corporate onboarding.
But then right in the middle of all that, you turn the page, and there is a highly detailed, absolutely non-negotiable chapter demanding a literal blood sacrifice to the sky.
Which, might be a bit of a red flag for a new job.
Right. It would completely change how you view the entire company. And the thing is, for decades, the West has treated early Chinese thought, and Confucianism in particular, exactly like that HR manual.
Yes, exactly. We've totally stripped it of its context.
We've been told over and over that it's this purely secular guide for social harmony. Like a brilliantly constructed list of best practices for how to treat your aging parents, how to respect your boss, and basically just how to keep a society from collapsing into chaos.
Right. A very practical, earthly rule book.
But today, we're going to prove that this manual was actually written by and for a deeply emotional, profoundly personal feeling God.
Yeah, we are talking about a fundamental paradigm shift here.
Totally.
Because we've looked at this massive theological blueprint and somehow, over centuries, convinced ourselves we were just reading a civic code. I mean, the metaphysical architecture of early Chinese thought is just vast, and we've essentially been ignoring the entire foundation that it's built upon.
And the stakes here are massive for anyone listening, because it totally changes how you have to view one of the most influential belief systems in all of human history. So the mission of this deep dive is to completely reevaluate early Chinese thought.
Right. We need to look at it fresh.
We're moving it away from this comfortable, kind of sterile idea of a wisdom tradition and revealing its deeply theological core. And to do this, we are diving into a stack of really groundbreaking new research today.
Oh, absolutely. The new scholarship is just incredible.
The main engine for our conversation is a completely fascinating academic paper. It was actually published just a few days ago, on July 21st, 2026, in the journal Sophia. It's by Kelly James Clark, and it's titled A Confucian Theology Through the Prism of Dong Zhongshu.
Which is such a brilliant, detailed paper.
It really is. And
Yeah.
we are pairing that with a brilliant piece of commentary on interfaith work, drawing really heavily on Iqbal Akhtar's 2026 book, Covenantal Pluralism.
And I think what both these texts are doing is demanding that we take off those modern secular glasses we've all been wearing.
Right.
They are asking us as modern readers to read the foundational literature of China with the exact same theological seriousness that we apply to, say, the Torah or the New Testament or the Quran.
Which brings us to the core question for you to keep in mind as you listen to this deep dive today.
Yeah.
Is Confucianism merely a philosophy of social harmony,
Yeah.
a kind of ethics without God?
Yeah.
Or has a modern distortion completely blinded us to its deeply spiritual theological reality?
That is the million-dollar question.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the best place to start is by looking at how this distortion happened in the first place, like the great misconception.
Yeah, it really is a huge misconception. If you look at the structure of modern interfaith dialogue, or even just, a standard university course on world religion.
Right, like Religion 101.
Exactly. It almost always operates on this really pervasive, unspoken assumption. So picture a massive global table.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
On one side of this table, you have what academics call the theistic traditions. So that's Judaism, Christianity, Islam. These are the traditions defined by a capital G God.
Right, a clear, defining deity.
A creator who makes a covenant with humanity, who lays down divine law, and crucially, who expects to be worshipped.
So that's the side of the table where you have a definitive architect of the universe.
Exactly. And then on the other side of the table sit the East Asian traditions. And Confucianism is usually seated right at the head of that side.
The VIP of the East Asian side.
Right. And they are labeled very specifically as wisdom traditions. And the underlying assumption there is that they bring brilliant ethics to the conversation, but no theology.
Right, like they have the rules, but not the ruler.
Yes. They bring intricate rituals, but no actual worship of a divine being. So it's presented to us as a system of profound reverence, but with absolutely no divine person to revere.
I just have to wonder, how did we arrive at a place where an entire civilization's foundational philosophy was just totally stripped of its spiritual elements? Like, has the West just been projecting its own historical anxieties onto these ancient texts?
Oh, without a doubt.
Like, did European philosophers just want a shining example of a highly moral society that didn't need a church?
It's exactly that. It's this fascinating kind of messy cocktail of Western projection and then later on, internal Chinese political reconstruction.
Okay, break that down for me. Start with the Western projection.
So, during the Enlightenment, European thinkers were desperate, really desperate to prove that you could have a moral, highly functioning society without the authority of the church.
Because they were fighting their own domestic battles against religious authority at home?
Exactly. So, when early reports of Confucianism came back to Europe from missionaries, these Enlightenment philosophers eagerly seized on it as proof. They were like, look, here is a massive, successful empire that is purely rational.
Oh, wow. So they cherry-picked it.
Totally. They translated the texts in ways that heavily emphasized the rational elements and completely downplayed or just ignored the supernatural ones. They essentially secularized Confucius to win an argument in Paris.
That is wild. They literally hijacked an ancient tradition just to serve their own domestic intellectual debates.
We really did. And then you compound that with what happened in the 20th century in China.
Right, the internal reconstruction you mentioned.
Yeah. Following the establishment of the People's Republic, and particularly during the post-Mao philosophical reconstructions, there was an active, state-sponsored effort to frame Chinese history through a materialist Marxist lens.
Okay, so the state had its own narrative it needed to push.
Exactly. The official narrative needed to emphasize a purely secular reading of its own history, so anything in the ancient texts that smacked of superstition or divine authority was heavily bracketed out, or it was just reinterpreted as mere primitive metaphor.
So you have Western philosophers scrubbing the text to prove you don't need God, and then modern Chinese historians scrubbing the text to prove a materialist worldview. No wonder the West views it as an HR handbook.
Right. The text never stood a chance against all those modern filters.
But Kelly James Clark's paper argues that if you actually read the primary text without those modern filters, you just read the words on the page, the landscape is anything but secular.
It is a densely populated spiritual ecosystem. If you were a citizen living during the Zhou or Han dynasties, you did not look up at an empty, mechanistic sky.
Right, the world was alive.
Completely. The world was teeming with unseen forces. The texts are just riddled with Shen.
Okay, let's break that down, because I don't want to just list foreign terms without understanding them. What exactly is a Shen? Like, how did an average person back then interact with it?
So Shen are spirits or deities,
Yeah.
but these aren't abstract, distant concepts. They are highly localized, active forces in the world.
Localized how? Like geographically?
Yeah. You would have a Shen of a specific mountain, a Shen of the local river that ran through your village, a Shen of the rain.
So it's very tied to nature.
Very much so.
Right.
An average farmer wouldn't just worry about the weather report. They would be actively, daily concerned with appeasing the Shen of the river to prevent a flood.
Wow, okay, so the landscape is literally alive with intention.
Yes. And then on top of the Shen, you have Gi.
Gi, what are those?
Gi translates roughly to ghosts or malevolent spirits.
Oh, okay, so the darker side of the spiritual realm.
Exactly. If a person died unjustly, or, and this is crucial, if their descendants failed to perform the proper ancestral rites, they didn't just peacefully fade into memory. They became Gi.
Wait, so if I forget to do a ritual for my great-grandfather, he becomes a Gi.
Yes, a hungry and potentially dangerous entity that could actually cause illness or bad luck for your family.
That is terrifying. Talk about pressure on the kids.
Right. And the sources also talk about a really complex view of the human soul itself, which ties right into this, the Hunpo.
The Hunpo, yeah, I read about this. It's a dual soul, right?
Yes, it is a dualistic understanding of the soul. They believe that upon death, the soul splits. The Hun, which is the ethereal, intellectual part of the soul, ascends to the heavenly realms.
Okay, so that goes up.
And the Po, which is the corporeal, physical, earthbound part of the soul, returns to the earth with the physical body.
Oh, wow. So you have to manage two different destinations for the dead.
Exactly. This is why burial practices and grave goods were so incredibly elaborate in early China. You had to physically care for the Po in the tomb with offerings of food and objects while simultaneously maintaining ancestral tablets in your home to honor the ascending Hun.
It is a hyper-spiritualized, deeply mechanical view of the afterlife. It's not just, oh, they went to a better place. It's like, they went to two places, and I have chores for both.
Exactly. It's highly bureaucratic in a way.
So we have river spirits, we have angry ghosts, and we have a dual-part soul that dictates exactly how you bury your grandfather. But if we were talking about theology, all of these spirits and ghosts, they feel a bit like middle management.
Right. The lower levels of the org chart.
Yeah. Does this system have a CEO? Is there a supreme being sitting at the absolute top of this spiritual hierarchy?
There absolutely is. Above all the Shen, above all the ancestors, above all the geese, it's the high god.
Okay, who is that?
In the earliest historical periods, like the Shang dynasty, this supreme deity is known as Di or Shangdi.
Changdi.
Yes, which translates directly to the Lord on high. Now, as we move forward in time into the Zhou dynasty, the terminology shifts slightly, and that supreme deity becomes increasingly known as Tian, which translates to heaven.
Okay, Tian. Now, this is where I think a lot of confusion happens. When a modern Western listener hears the word heaven, they immediately think of a place.
Right.
You know, the pearly gates, the clouds, a destination you go to when you die. It's a location. But that's not what Tian means in this context, is it?
Not at all. That is a massive misconception. Tian is not a location. Tian is an active supreme agent.
An agent, so a being.
Yes. To give you a sense of how deeply embedded this is, Kelly James Clark points out something incredible in his paper. He looks at the Analects.
Which is the absolute foundational text of Confucianism.
Exactly. It's the text that defines the entire tradition. And in the Analects alone, there are 17 separate references to an anthropomorphic heaven.
17. That's not just a passing metaphor.
No. 17. We are talking about a heaven that has a will, a heaven that judges human actions, a heaven that actively protects people.
Do we have an example of that protection?
Yeah, a great one. Confucius himself, when he is surrounded and threatened with assassination in the state of Kuang, he doesn't rely on, secular stoicism or martial arts.
What does he do?
He says, and I quote, "Heaven produced the virtue that is in me. What can the people of Huantui do to me?"
Wow.
He views his earthly mission as directly, personally protected by a conscious, divine entity.
17 references in the foundational text. This isn't a fringe interpretation at all. It is the literal bedrock of the philosophy.
It's baked right in.
And if this high god, this Tian, is so central, then we have to figure out how this theology actually governed the empire in practice. Because you don't just have a highly emotional, powerful god and then leave him alone.
Right, you have to interact with him.
Exactly. There has to be a physical mechanism for how humanity talks to him.
No.
Which brings us directly to the Han Dynasty and a scholar who basically re-engineered the entire cosmos for the emperor. We need to talk about Dong Zhongshu.
Oh, Dong Zhongshu. If we want to understand Confucian theology at its most systematized and powerful, he is the indispensable figure.
Okay, give us the quick bio. Who was he?
He lived from roughly 195 to 115 BCE. And to put his immense influence in perspective, you have to realize that before Dong, Confucianism was just one of many competing schools of thought in China.
Right, it was like a philosophical marketplace.
Exactly. You had legalism, Taoism, Mohism, and others all vying for power. Dong is the brilliant architect who synthesized all these ideas and successfully convinced the Han Emperor Wu to make Confucianism the absolute exclusive orthodox ideology of the state.
He is the guy who took the raw philosophy of Confucius and literally forged it into the steel of the imperial state.
That's a great way to put it.
And the source material we are zeroing in on today to understand his theology is his masterwork, the Chunky Fanlu.
The luxuriant gems of the spring and autumn, it's an incredibly dense, intricate text. And what it does is seek to map out exactly how the spiritual realm dictates human politics and human ethics.
And the absolute centerpiece of Dong's theology, the literal mechanism through which humanity interacts with the high god, is a ritual known as the Suburban Sacrifice, or the Jiao.
The Jiao.
Yes.
The ultimate expression of human submission to divine authority.
I really want to spend some time on this Suburban Sacrifice because the level of detail the sources provide is just staggering.
It really is.
This isn't just someone lighting a candle in their living room or saying a quick prayer before a meal. Dong Zhongshu elevates this one ritual to a matter of cosmic survival.
Because for Dong, the Jiao is everything. His absolute obsession is with the exactitude of the ritual. The physical logistics are paramount. They cannot be altered.
Walk us through the logistics. Where does it happen?
First, the sacrifice must be performed at the southern suburb of the capital city.
Why the south? Why not the center of the city?
Because south correlates with yang energy. It correlates with light, with the direction of the midday sun, and therefore it correlates intimately with heaven.
Ah, okay. The geography matches the theology.
Exactly.
And the timing is hyper-specific too, right? He insists it must be performed at the very head of the year, not the second week, not when the weather gets a bit warmer and it's more comfortable outside. The absolute beginning.
Right. And the logic there is, again, deeply theological, Dong argues that the ritual calendar of the empire must perfectly, flawlessly mirror the cosmic order.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, heaven is the primordial root of all existence. Heaven existed before the ancestors, before the physical earth, before the state was founded. Therefore, because heaven was first in time, heaven must receive the very first and the absolute best offering of the year.
You do not sacrifice to your deceased grandfather or to the spirits of the earth before you have sacrificed to the most honored.
Never. That would be a massive cosmic insult.
And the materials used are strictly regulated. The sources mention the use of the, quote, most refined millet. Imagine the pressure of that. You have thousands of imperial attendants sorting grain, probably terrified that if a single substandard piece of millet makes it into the sacrificial vessel, the emperor might lose the favor of the universe.
It's a terrifying level of cosmic micromanagement.
Totally.
But Dong provides the emperor with historical proof to back up this terror. He operates like a theological historian.
What kind of proof? Like case studies?
Exactly. He points back to the legendary King Wen of the Zhou dynasty. He says, look at King Wen. He meticulously performed the Suburban Sacrifice. He revered the high god with the finest offerings in the exact right season, facing the exact right direction.
And what happened?
As a direct result, heaven bestowed blessings on him, and his dynasty flourished for centuries. They were rewarded for their ritual exactitude.
Okay, so that's the positive case study. But then Dong pulls the ultimate rhetorical move. He contrasts the glorious Zhou dynasty with the Qin dynasty.
Right, the foil to the Zhou.
Now, for context, the Qin dynasty is the one that immediately preceded the Han. They were the ones who first unified China, but they were brutal, highly centralized, and they collapsed incredibly quickly.
Right, they only lasted a few decades. And Dong offers what is basically a theological autopsy of the Qin dynasty.
A theological autopsy. I love that. What does he find?
He says the Qin collapsed because they relied purely on secular, brutal force, and they neglected the suburban sacrifice. They abandoned the ancient statues of heaven worship.
Wow.
Because they failed to offer the refined millet at the head of the year, they failed to attract heaven's blessings. And because of that, the universe actively dismantled their empire.
He is laying out a raw, causal argument right to the emperor's face. Worship heaven exactly as I prescribe, and your empire thrives. Neglect this sacrifice, and God will crush your dynasty.
It's a very clear threat.
He even institutes a rule that the emperor cannot go to war without asking heaven first.
Yes, the military constraints are fascinating.
Right. If there is a rebellion in the provinces, the emperor cannot just raise a single troop for a punitive expedition without first performing a sacrifice to inform heaven. He essentially has to ask for divine permission to use violence.
Which places an absolute transcendent ceiling on the emperor's power. Think about it. He's the most powerful man on earth. He commands armies, but he is a subordinate to the sky.
Okay, wait, I have to push back here, because there's a massive contradiction staring us in the face with all of this.
Let's hear it.
Everything I have ever read or heard about Confucianism says that filial piety, honoring your earthly parents, is the absolute, unquestionable, paramount rule.
Right, it's famous for that.
It's the core of the moral code. Doesn't the Xiaojing, the classic of filial piety, literally say that this earthly reverence for your parents is the root of all virtue?
It does say exactly that.
So how can an emperor, who is supposed to be the model of Confucian virtue for everyone else, prioritize a cosmic ritual over his own human parents? That seems totally contradictory.
What's fascinating here is how Dong Zhongshu navigates that exact contradiction, because you're right, it's a huge problem. And his solution is perhaps his most brilliant theological innovation.
How does he solve it?
He doesn't discard filial piety at all. He scales it up. He takes the concept and expands the definition of family to include the entire cosmos.
Okay, how?
Dong points out that the emperor holds a very specific literal title, the Son of Heaven. Therefore, logically and theologically, his heavenly father outranks his earthly father.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly clever.
Isn't it?
He takes the most sacred, unquestionable earthly virtue, obeying your dad, and he weaponizes it to enforce the worship of a supreme god.
Precisely. The logic is completely inescapable for a Confucian. Dong writes something to the effect of, how can one who receives the designation of Son of Heaven fail to perform the rites? This is no different from the son who must not fail to provide food for his father.
So he just swaps the fathers.
Yeah. He argues that when the new year arrives, the emperor must sacrifice to heaven first. Only after the Heavenly Father is fed and honored does the emperor dare to offer sacrifices to the spirits of the earth or his own deceased human ancestors.
Heaven before earth, the divine parent before the human parent.
Always.
And he pushes this to an extreme that I think modern people will find shocking. The sources discuss the ancient Chinese 3-year mourning period.
Oh yeah, the mourning period.
When a parent died, you were expected to step completely away from society. You wore coarse garments, you ate simple food, you didn't listen to music, and you deeply mourned for 3 whole years. It was a sacred societal obligation.
It was the ultimate test of a person's moral character in early China. To interrupt it for any earthly reason was a profound career-ending scandal.
But Dong says, even during this 3-year mourning period for your human mother or father, the suburban sacrifice cannot be skipped.
Think about the gravity of that for a moment.
It's wild.
Dong insists that the emperor must suspend his grief for his earthly ancestors, put on the bright ritual robes, and go out to serve heaven. Why? Because, as Dong explicitly states, heaven is more venerable than humankind.
That is a staggering prioritization. If you are demanding that an emperor abandon the funeral mourning of his own father just to go offer millet to the sky, this heaven cannot just be a cold, empty void in space.
No, absolutely not.
It cannot just be an abstract force or the laws of physics. You don't suspend a funeral for gravity. Heaven must have a personality.
That is the inescapable conclusion of Dong's entire project. Heaven is not an impersonal cosmic principle. Heaven is a divine person.
A person with feelings.
Yes. Heaven possesses consciousness, intentionality, and will. It makes active choices.
The sources make a big point about heaven loving Ren, which is the Confucian concept of humaneness, benevolence, or compassion.
Right, Ren is the ultimate virtue.
But if heaven has a personality and desires humaneness, how does it communicate that to us? Because we don't have stories in the Confucian texts of burning bushes or booming voices thundering down from the clouds to dictate laws on stone tablets, right?
Right, and that absence of a booming voice is exactly what led earlier Western scholars to assume the tradition was secular in the first place.
Because they were looking for a very specific type of God.
Exactly. They were looking for an Abrahamic mode of communication in a Chinese theological framework. But heaven communicates constantly. It just communicates through the physics of the natural world and the unfolding of historical events.
There is that incredible quote from Analect 17.18. I love this part. Confucius is frustrated, and he tells his disciple he is thinking of giving up speech entirely.
A very dramatic moment for a teacher.
Right. And his disciple panics and says, if you do not speak, what will we, your disciples, have to pass on? And Confucius replies, what does heaven ever say? Yet there are the 4 seasons going round, and there are the 100 things coming into being. What does heaven ever say?
It's such a profound epistemological statement. Heaven doesn't need to speak words, because the very mechanics of the universe are its language.
The seasons going round are the articulation of God's will.
Yes. And Dong Zhongshu takes the seed of an idea from Confucius and constructs an entire theological physics around it. He literally maps the 4 seasons directly onto the emotional life of God.
I found this breakdown absolutely mesmerizing.
It's brilliant.
Dong literally categorizes the weather as the mood swings of the cosmos. He says that spring is heaven's happiness.
Yes, because it's the vital energy of happiness that warms the earth, sprouts the seeds, and engenders life. When you feel spring air, you are feeling heaven's happiness.
And then summer is heaven's joy.
Right. Joy is an expansive, nurturing emotion. Just as a joyous parent nourishes a child, the intense heat of summer nourishes the crops and brings the life that was generated in spring to full, vibrant maturity.
But then the earth tilts, and we get to the pivot. Autumn is heaven's anger.
Yes, a very sudden shift.
It cools the air, it cools the weak, it literally kills the vegetation. The leaves fall, the crops are harvested and cut down. It's violent.
And finally, winter is heaven's sorrow. The world is dead, frozen, and dormant. The energy of sorrow seals up the earth, storing away the remnants of life deep underground, essentially mourning the death that occurred in autumn.
It is such a beautiful, poetic way to view the world. But if we take it literally as theology, I have some serious questions.
Sure.
If autumn is anger, and autumn literally kills the crops and strips the trees, does that mean heaven is a wrathful God? Are we talking about a capricious deity who just gets angry, throws a tantrum, and sends a hurricane to wipe out a village because he's in a bad mood?
It's a vital distinction to make, and Dong is very clear about this to the emperor. The anger of heaven is pedagogical.
Pedagogical, so it's teaching something.
Yes. It is meant to teach and to correct, never to destroy out of mere spite or loss of control. Dong explains that natural disasters, floods, droughts, earthquakes are heaven's warnings to a ruler who has strayed from the path of humaneness.
And what about weird stuff like eclipses?
Bizarre celestial events like eclipses or comets are heaven's threats. They are visual markers saying, pay attention.
So it's not a tantrum. It's more like a parent grounding a child or letting you touch a hot stove just enough to teach you not to burn the house down.
Exactly. Heaven only destroys a ruling family after repeated, stubborn refusals to change course, because the absolute essential character of heaven is Ren humaneness.
So the core is always love.
Right, which means heaven's fundamental underlying intention is always to love and to confer benefit. The anger is just a tool used by love to prevent ultimate catastrophe.
And the author of our main source, Kelly James Clark, draws a completely mind-blowing parallel here to the Abrahamic God. We usually think of these traditions as totally fundamentally separate, but the structural grammar of how God behaves is almost identical.
It really is. If you read the Hebrew prophets, you see this exact same pedagogy of divine anger.
Like where?
Look at the book of Jonah in the Hebrew Bible. God is angry with the city of Nineveh because of their wickedness. He sends Jonah to warn them of impending destruction.
Right, the classic 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown.
But when the people of Nineveh actually hear the warning, they fast, they put on sackcloth, they change their ways. And what does God do?
He relents.
He relents. He doesn't destroy them. Because the anger was a mechanism to generate repentance, not an end in itself.
The warning worked. The goal was reformation, not annihilation.
Exactly. And you see the exact same theology in the Quran with the warner narratives. Prophets are sent to warn cities they are violating divine law. The sequence is almost always the same.
Which is?
A patient God warns first, frightens second, and unleashes destruction only as an absolute last resort when the people have proven themselves completely irredeemable. Dong Zhongshu is articulating the exact same divine patience in Han Dynasty China.
That resonance across completely different civilizations is startling. It speaks to a deep, shared human intuition about how ultimate authority should function.
It really does.
But to understand how heaven physically enacts these emotions on Earth, like how it actually makes the spring warm or the autumn cold, we have to talk about the physical tools heaven uses.
Right, the mechanics of it.
We have to talk about two of the most famous and perhaps most misunderstood concepts in all of Chinese philosophy, yin and yang.
Yin and yang are the operational modalities of heaven. If the seasons are heaven's emotions, yin and yang are the literal muscles heaven flexes to express those emotions.
The muscles of God.
Yes, they are the two basic forms of qi, or vital energy, through which heaven manages the entire phenomenal world.
Now, when a listener today hears yin and yang, they immediately picture that ubiquitous pop culture symbol.
Oh, of course.
You see it on T-shirts, you see it on surfboards, it's a tattoo on a college student's ankle. It is that perfect circle divided by a curved line into perfectly equal halves of black and white swirling together in eternal harmony.
Right.
We're taught from a very young age that these represent equal, opposing, balanced forces in the universe. Light and dark, male and female, good and evil, perfectly 50-50.
That is the modern, highly sanitized understanding.
Right, because reading Dong Zhongshu's breakdown, he is saying the cosmos is fundamentally rigged. It is asymmetric.
Totally asymmetric.
We think of yin and yang like two perfectly equal weights on a scale. But Dong is saying the scale is intentionally imbalanced by God. Yang is a 50-pound weight and yin is like a 5-pound weight.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of Dong's theology, the idea of perfect balance is actually a dangerous misreading of the universe. In Dong's system, heaven actively privileges yang over yin.
So they aren't equal at all.
No. They are complementary, yes, because you need both hot and cold to complete a full year, but they are absolutely hierarchical.
How does that hierarchy actually play out in his physics? Like, what does yang actually do versus yin?
Well, remember that heaven loves accretion growth, life, expansion, and heaven abhors rescission, death, decay, contraction. Therefore, yang is associated with spring and summer, with life-giving warmth, and most importantly, with the supreme virtue of humaneness.
So yang is the good stuff.
Yin, on the other hand, is associated with autumn and winter, with cooling, killing, punishment, and the human vice of greed.
Dong literally says that yang is the master of the year and yin is just the assistant. I love that analogy. Yang drives the car, yin just sits in the passenger seat and helps navigate when it gets dark.
Yes. Yang drives the primary creative processes of the universe. Yin serves a necessary but strictly auxiliary function. Heaven intentionally restricts yin so that yang can predominate. The universe is biased toward life and benevolence.
And the implications of that rigged scale go far beyond a philosophical quirk, because Dong views the physical cosmos as the ultimate template for human behavior.
Exactly. As above, so below.
He argues that human rulers must emulate this cosmic asymmetry. If the emperor is the son of heaven, he has to act like his father.
Precisely. A ruler cannot just be 50% nice and 50% brutal, claiming he is balancing his role.
Like, I executed a bunch of people, but I also built a hospital, so we're good.
Right, that doesn't work. A ruler who relies heavily on harsh punishments, which correlates to the killing energy of yin, rather than transformative moral education, which correlates to the life-giving energy of yang, is defying the very fabric of the cosmos.
He is physically breaking the scale of the universe.
Dong explicitly warns the emperor, he says. Punishment cannot be used to perfect the age, just as yin cannot be used to complete the year. The ruler must put love first and sternness behind.
Or else what?
Or else he brings disaster. If an emperor uses violence as his primary tool, he is literally pulling the deathly cold of winter into the middle of summer. It is an abomination against nature.
And the sources bring in another concept to illustrate this hierarchy of loyalty, which is the 5 phases theory. Specifically, Dong's interpretation of the earth phase.
Yes, the 5 phases: wood, fire, metal, water, and earth.
Exactly.
Dong uses the 5 phases to map out relationships of generation and overcoming, but his treatment of earth is really unique. Earth sits at the center of the phases. It does an incredible amount of heavy lifting.
It does all the work.
The earth generates the wind, it produces the rain, it grows the grain that feeds the entire empire.
But earth doesn't take the credit for any of it.
Exactly. Earth produces the wind, but it defers all the glory to heaven. That is why we call them heavenly winds and heavenly rains, even though they originated from the physical earth. Dong uses this as the ultimate model for great loyalty in human politics.
It's a blueprint for the perfect civil servant. Just as earth serves heaven with immense diligence and hard work, but gives heaven all the reputation for the achievements, ministers must serve the emperor.
The natural world isn't just a backdrop for Dong, it is a literal, physical instruction manual for political structure.
The physics of the world dictate the ethics of the world.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the cosmos absolutely demands that benevolence yang rules over punishment yin, and the emperor, as the son of heaven, is tasked with executing this benevolent will on earth. But what happens when the emperor goes bad?
The tyrant problem.
Right. What happens when the guy in charge gets paranoid, gets greedy, and decides he really prefers the sharp, punitive edge of yin?
This brings us to the absolute crux of Dong's political theology, and it revolves around the precise definition of the emperor as the unique, singular mediator between heaven and earth.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the sources break down the actual etymology of the Chinese character for king, which is Wang.
Yes, it's a beautiful visual representation.
This blew my mind. The character is drawn with 3 horizontal lines. The top line represents heaven, the bottom line represents earth, the middle line represents humankind.
Right.
And those 3 horizontal lines are connected, straight through the center, by a single vertical line. And that vertical line represents the king. He is the physical thread that joins the realms of existence.
He is the singular conduit of cosmic authority. Dong writes that the Son of Heaven alone receives orders directly from heaven, and then the world receives its orders from the Son of Heaven. It is a very strict, uncompromising chain of authority.
But looking at that structure, doesn't that inherently license absolute tyranny?
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah. If an emperor can stand up in front of his court, point to the sky, and say, "I is the vertical line. I have a direct, exclusive hotline to the supreme architect of the universe. My authority comes from the high God. Who on earth can possibly argue with him?" It sounds like the perfect theological recipe for an unchecked, brutal dictatorship.
It absolutely would be if it weren't for the brilliant structural constraint that Dong builds directly into the center of this theology.
What's the constraint?
It is the most famous political concept in all of Chinese history. The mandate of heaven. The Tian.
The mandate of heaven.
The power conferred upon the emperor by heaven is highly, highly conditional. The ruler is bound by an unbreakable mutual obligation.
Conditional power. He doesn't own the throne. He's just renting it. And heaven is the landlord.
A landlord who demands very specific upkeep of the property. The formula Dong uses is brilliantly simple but devastating in its implications. He says that the people follow the lead of the ruler, but the ruler must follow the lead of heaven.
So if the ruler's orders comply with heaven, meaning they are rooted in Ren, they prioritize the life-giving yang over the punishing yin. They actively benefit the people, then the people comply. The system works.
And this is the most radical part of the entire theology. If a ruler's orders defy heaven, if he becomes cruel, selfish, and reliant on yin, the people do not just have the right to disobey.
What do they have?
They have an obligation to disobey.
An obligation to disobey the emperor. Let that sink in. In an ancient empire, the foundational theology dictates that a citizen must rebel against a tyrant.
Yes, because an emperor who doesn't act like heaven is no longer actually the emperor. The vertical line has been broken.
Exactly. The mandate is gone.
Dong's theology does sacralize authority, yes. It makes the throne a divine institution. But it simultaneously constrains the man sitting on it. Heaven's authority always, without exception, supersedes the emperor's authority.
So when he loses the mandate.
When a ruler loses the mandate of heaven, he is stripped of his cosmic protection. He is no longer the son of heaven. He is just a man. And a man who oppresses the people can and should be overthrown.
And the expert commentary we are referencing, drawing from Iqbal Akhtar's work on covenantal pluralism, brings this into a staggering global perspective.
It's such a vital comparison.
We tend to think of this as a uniquely Chinese phenomenon, but the sources connect this exact logic of constrained power to other major world traditions.
When we look at the Hebrew Brit, the covenant, we see a nearly identical structural constraint on power. In ancient Israel, kingship was never absolute. The king was always fundamentally answerable to divine law.
Right, he wasn't above it.
Exactly. The Torah explicitly limits the king's ability to amass wealth, wives, and horses, ensuring he doesn't elevate himself above the law or exploit the people.
Think about the story of King David and the prophet Nathan. David is the anointed king, the hero of Israel. But he abuses his power, commits adultery with Bathsheba, and has her husband Uriah killed in battle. He acts like an absolute tyrant.
A classic abuse of power.
And what happens? Nathan, a prophet with no army and no political power, walks right up to the king and condemns him to his face. Nathan holds David accountable to a higher divine law, and David has to repent.
That is the exact mechanism of the mandate of heaven in action. In China, it was a Confucian scholar's men who studied the will of heaven through the classics and the natural world who function like the Hebrew prophets.
Oh, that's such a good parallel.
They had the moral authority, backed by the cosmos, to stand before the emperor and tell him he was violating the will of the high god.
And Akhtar's work also connects this to the Islamic tradition, specifically the Medinan Mitak.
Yes, the Prophet's Compact in Medina. When the Prophet Muhammad arrived in Medina, he didn't establish an absolute dictatorship.
Right.
He formed a mitak, a covenantal constitution that bound diverse tribes, Muslims, Jewish tribes, pagan tribes, into a single political community, an ummah. And this community was bound by mutual obligation and divine witness. The leader was responsible for justice according to divine parameters.
In all these traditions, Confucian, Jewish, Islamic transcendent authority is not there to give tyrants a blank check to do whatever they want. It is the exact opposite.
It constrains them.
God is brought into politics specifically to discipline human power. Power is elevated and sacralized only so it can be held accountable by something infinitely higher than the state itself.
It is a shared architecture of human civilization. Whether you are in ancient Israel, 7th century Arabia, or Han Dynasty China, there is this fundamental, profound human realization that the ruler cannot be the ultimate judge of his own actions. There must be an independent, transcendent standard of justice.
This completely changes how we should view global dialogues between different cultures. It shatters that neat binary map we talked about at the beginning of the show with the big table.
He totally does.
We aren't looking at theistic religions on one side and secular wisdom on the other. We are looking at different cultures utilizing a very similar theological grammar to solve the exact same ultimate human problem: how to keep powerful men from destroying society.
And that realization fundamentally reshapes the interfaith table. The commentary we're referencing pulls out 3 major implications from Kelly James Clark's work for how we talk about religion, philosophy, and politics today.
Let's walk through those because they are incredibly actionable. The first implication is that Confucians belong in theological conversations, not just ethical ones.
Historically, if there was a global interfaith gathering to talk about the nature of God, divine revelation, or the afterlife, East Asian traditions weren't invited to the main stage.
Right, they were put at the kids' table.
They were relegated to breakout sessions about family values, work ethic, or social harmony. But Clark's work proves that a dialogue that brackets out Shendi, the high god, is a dialogue with a caricature of Chinese thought.
You aren't meeting the actual tradition. You are meeting the secularized, edited version that modern philosophers created to make themselves comfortable.
Exactly. If you want to understand Confucianism, you have to engage with its theology. You have to talk about the suburban sacrifice. You have to talk about the mandate of heaven.
The second implication is about anthropomorphism, and I find this one fascinating. A lot of modern comparative religion and even modern theology in the West treats the idea of a personal God with feelings as kind of embarrassing.
Yeah, like it's unrefined.
Like it's a primitive, childish stage of religion that enlightened modern people are supposed to outgrow in favor of abstract, bloodless, cosmic principles. We want the ground of being, not a God who gets angry about crops.
But Dong Zhongshu, who is arguably one of the most brilliant systematizers in human history, moves in the exact opposite direction.
Right.
The more carefully he reads the mechanics of the cosmos, the more intensely personal heaven becomes. Heaven is paternal, deeply emotional, and fiercely morally invested in human behavior.
It's not an embarrassment. It's the point.
Anthropomorphism is a bridge. It allows for profound, intimate connection. If you pray to a God who hears, who loves, and who grieves, you share a profound kinship with a Han Dynasty scholar who believed that a crime against heaven leaves you with no one to pray to. It humanizes the divine in a way that allows humans to actually relate to it.
And the third implication is intensely political. The mandate of heaven gives the world a shared vocabulary for accountable power. So what does this all mean? For the listener who is sitting in traffic right now, or walking their dog, or folding laundry, why does it matter that a scholar living over 2,000 years ago thought the sky had feelings and could get angry at a bad emperor?
This raises an important question, perhaps the most urgent question of our own time. We live in a modern era where we are witnessing a global, frightening rise in religious nationalism. Across different continents and cultures, we see leaders trying to fuse their political authority with an unchecked divine mandate.
They want the title Son of Heaven, but they want absolutely none of the filial obligations that come with it.
Exactly.
They want the power of the vertical line connecting them to God, but they refuse to be accountable to the top horizontal line. They want God to endorse them, but not to judge them.
That's beautifully put. And Dong Zhongshu offers a powerful, ancient counter-narrative from a decidedly non-Western perspective. He shows us that every major tradition, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Confucianism, carries within its own DNA a textual tradition in which the throne is judged.
The ruler is never, ever a law unto himself.
Legitimate power is always accountable to a higher moral order, and the dignity of the governed is grounded in something transcendent that no earthly state has the authority to revoke.
The sources paint this incredibly beautiful, evocative picture at the end to summarize this shared human heritage. They ask us to picture the Han Emperor, arguably the most powerful man in the world at that time, stepping out into the freezing cold at the head of the new year in the southern suburb of the capital to perform the Suburban Sacrifice.
What a scene.
He suspends his earthly concerns, he ignores his own immense ego, he prepares the finest, most meticulously sorted millet, and he bows his head to the most honored.
And as the commentary so beautifully states, a Jew standing in synagogue at Rosh Hashanah, hearing the shofar and declaring God as King of the universe, or a Muslim standing in prayer at Eid al-Adha, submitting completely to the will of Allah, they would understand the exact motion the Han Emperor is making in their bones.
It's the same posture.
The theology, the ritual, the specific name of God might differ, but the core human posture is identical. The one who gives the year comes first.
It is a shared grammar of humanity. The interfaith table is, as the author says, far longer than we thought. We just need to stop projecting our own secular anxieties onto it and pull up more chairs.
When we read these texts for what they actually are, we discover a much richer, much more interconnected human family.
I absolutely love that. We have really gone on a massive journey today. We started with this deeply ingrained, quiet assumption that Confucianism was just a secular HR handbook for ancient China, totally devoid of God or spiritual depth.
And we completely shattered that.
We really did. By looking through the prism of Dong Zhongshu and the Chunky Fan Lu, we have peeled back the layers to discover a universe governed by a heaven that feels, that cares, that gets angry specifically to warn us, and that holds human power strictly, rigidly accountable.
We found a theology of a divine parent who desires our humaneness above all else, and who rigged the very seasons of the year to prove it.
It completely rewrites the atlas of human thought. And before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final unscripted thought to mull over. We have spent a lot of time in the modern West celebrating the fact that we modernized our society by separating church and state.
Right.
And historically, that was absolutely necessary to prevent religious tyranny and horrific wars. But looking at Dong Zhongshu's mandate of heaven forces us to ask a totally different and, frankly, a very uncomfortable question. In our rush to strip the divine out of our politics, in our desire to make everything purely secular and rational, did we accidentally strip away the ultimate, transcendent check on human power? If a ruler is only accountable to the state, and the ruler is the state, who is left to tell the emperor he has lost the mandate.
Wow.
If there is no heaven to fear, what stops the king from bringing the deadly frost of yin into the middle of summer? Something for you to think about.
A vital, chilling question for our time.
Thank you so much for joining us as we completely redrew the map today and explored the deeply theological heart of early China. Keep questioning the assumptions you've been handed because there is always, always more to learn. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.